Welcome back everybody to another Malazan video, and I figured today I'll try something new because it's warm outside, like super warm, so I sat down on my balcony and I hope the noises are not too brutal. My neighbors won't start partying or anything like that, and then we can talk today. So this is not another, well, it's Midnight Tides related, but it's not fully not an update on my Midnight Tides read through. Today I want to talk about something else. Today I want to talk about religion, capitalism, and Letherii exceptionalism, or something like that. So it's going to get political in a way, it's going to get religious, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I feel like my views might come through. Well, if I offend you, then that's basically your problem. So let's do this. Cheers. Dude, feels like spring. Like seriously, we had snow and ice last week, and minus 10, minus 12 Celsius. Now it's 15 degrees in the sun, which is crazy. Anyway, so let's let's get started. I wanted to talk about Letheras and the religion and the worship of gold in Letheras, and in comparison to American exceptionalism and the influence of Calvinist ideas of predestination on capitalism and American exceptionalism as a parallel to the ideology within Letheras, which I feel is a really fun topic to talk about, right? Okay, so I'll first give a few rough outlines, ideas, what we're talking about when I say predestination, when I say Calvinist in this case, and how that argument works. And then I'm going to look at how you can apply it to the whole idea of how the Letherii within Midnight Tides are like thinking, working, and so forth. Because I feel you can do that parallel in there. There's a bunch of ideas that, like, you know, if you're looking for allegories within the Malazan Book of the Fallen, that's, I feel like one of the easier ones to draw is the idea of Letheras as the as a comparison to how the United States kind of work. You know, you have the parallel with it being the colony of an old empire, but now on its own. You have all this idea of them being very special, and you have a bunch of these things that you can like pull in there. And I figured we'll just look at that for a moment. Obviously, this is my opinion. This is not this is my interpretation. So proceed with caution on it. Gods, I hope the audio is good on this. Anyway, let's start. We need to talk about predestination first to understand that. Predestination is a theological concept, and I'm probably doing it wrong because I'm not a theologian. I've read theology books, but I'm not a theologian. And so I'll try to define it. So the question that we're dealing with in the special case of predestination, like the idea is, if God is all-knowing, he should also know what we are going to do every single moment of our lives. That's the idea, like, otherwise he would not be all-knowing. Now we have a problem with free will here, but we're not going to go into that today. The question now is, if God already knows all these things, he already knows whether we're going to end up in heaven or in hell, to make it simple. Like if we get salvation or if we get damnation, right? True. Now what we need to look at is if that is the case, like everything is predestined because God already knows all of that. That's pretty basic, and a pretty basic idea that kind of follows from the idea of God being omniscient. And so that the problem then is how each church, how you deal with that problem in the face of some people being well off, other people being not so well off, other people suffering, and so forth. You know, that's kind of the idea. Also the idea of, if a God knows what we're gonna do, why does he let us do stupid shit? Like, why does he allow us, the idea of sinning and so forth? How does that work? And we need to talk about that. And the idea there is kind of connected to the idea of grace, and that's where we're going to go into the whole like more Calvinist thing. So the idea within Calvinism is, because of John Calvin, he's one of the reformers of the Protestant part of Christianity. He's from Switzerland / France, that area back in the time. And his idea of Reformation of Christianity compared to the Lutheran interpretation, which is more from the German regions, is popular in France, the Netherlands, England, and from there on travels to America. That's the way we're gonna go with the American exceptionalism. So his idea is that he is a proponent of strong predestination, even we call it double predestination. And the idea there is that God has decided for every single human being already whether they'll end up in hell or in heaven. It's all predestined. That's what we call double predestination, because you have like the predestination for salvation and the predestination for damnation, right? Which is rather strong. And now we have a problem, because if that's the case, right? If that's the case, we all want to find out where we were going to end up. Like, we're living our lives and everything's fine, and we'll either end up in heaven or in hell. It's already decided by our good buddy God up there. And we'd like to know, won't we? Just, it's like, would be cool to know. And obviously that's not really possible, but there's a very human way to look at it, and that's like success and living a godly life and having success in life being obviously seen to be sort of indications that God might actually really like us and might save us and bring us salvation. So if we have success and live a godly life, for whatever godly means in that case, we're on God's good side. We're predestined we're sanctioned, our actions are sanctioned by God, right? So that's the idea there. That's not exactly within Calvin's doctrine itself. It's more something that happened more logical, as a conclusion of that within the interpretation of people on the go, who did not actually plan too deeply into that. If you're hearing noises in the background, that's my flatmate playing Dungeons and Dragons over Discord in the next room. I'm not sure how well that door is sealing right now, just as an aside. Anyway, so what we have there is the idea that success in life combined with piety is a sign of predestination for salvation. And now we come to that point where this idea travels to the Americas within the mostly 17th century, through those vaunted Puritans who leave England at least after they lose the Civil War and Cromwell's dead and so forth, and the terrible Stuarts come back and debauch the country. That's not how it works. So what happens is the concept of providence means everything is obviously predestined by God, and the fact that we have success is subsumed under the idea of providence. So there comes this idea within the American, the more Puritan parts of American settlers, like the English Puritans settling in parts of New England, mostly New England at the time, comes the idea of providence, because they see themselves as really virtuous. There's a lot of weirdness going on there. We're not going to talk about that today. But the idea there is that they are doing the Lord's work. You go read those books from the time. Those They see themselves obviously as the pious few that they compare their like movement, their immigration to America with the Israelite exodus and everything like that. So it's a lot of crazy talk in there, but they transport that rather strict interpretation of Calvinist doctrine to America, and then because it's not, it's a more, because within the idea of the Puritan, let's call them nonconformist ideology, the idea is it's a rather democratic one. Everyone is allowed to read the Bible. Everyone is basically encouraged to read the Bible and do their own interpretations on it, which they do. So there, this idea of worldly success being a sign of God's benevolence and being a sign of divine approval, it spreads with that. So they see themselves as God's chosen because of their piety, which, you know, may be up for debate, but that's a different question. And that spirit travel, like over time, kind of reinforces into the idea of American exceptionalism, because that string of Calvinist doctrine is rather strong in the formation of the United States over time. And so that's a more religious root of American exceptionalism as an idea. Fun, isn't it? It also, because of the idea of worldly success, monetary success, economic success being a sign of God's approval, of divine approval, links the American exceptionalism with that religious background, also with capitalism and with the idea of capitalist success, which is a rather powerful mix, a heady mixture, as they say. And it's one that you can still find all the way up today. I mean, you look at your good buddy Ronald Reagan, who is talking about America being the shining city on the hill. There's this rather Puritan rhetoric in there, even though obviously he who goes out to seek hypocrisy will find it there, is what I'm trying to say. All right. The idea of capitalism being a consequence, or being very much married to Calvinist theology, is obviously not new. I didn't come up with that. Actually, another German did. A founder of sociology, our good friend Max Weber, wrote an essay on the Calvinist spirit in capitalism. Go read it. It's well worth your time, I suspect. And I'm not exactly agreeing with all of that, but the idea there is rather profound to see that this idea of predestination and providence, if read outside the pure theology, can lead to the idea that capitalism can lead to capitalist ideas of reaching as much monetary success as possible to that. And that's the important trick there, is like, to gain monetary success, to gain economic success, helps to reassure oneself of God's favor and thus salvation in the afterlife. So we're basically, if we believe in that doctrine, we're subconsciously driven to make as much money as possible, because that shows God likes us, and that shows we're gonna end up in heaven. And that kind of gives us the chance to kind of ignore our smaller sins on the side, because obviously God's blessed us, hasn't he? So yeah, that's the way that thing basically works. This is rather rough, and there's like, if you want to have an academic debate on the whole subject, then we can totally do that. But that wasn't the point of this. This is not capitalism 101 today. It's not even Calvinism 101 today, because there's more in that. And I didn't even talk about grace and how St. Paul ruined Christianity forever. Nope. I just want to roughly outline what this whole thing is. And I hope that I was successful in that. All right, now let's look at Letheras and Letherii ideas and how they work. All right. The idea there, obviously, is that Letheras was that colony of the First Empire, and hey, that's another thing that I should have mentioned. Okay, let's look first at that, and that's the idea of millenarianism. You know what millenarianism is? It's not about eating avocado toasts, it's about something entirely different. That's the idea that you're living in the end times and something big is coming. It's mostly a religious thing. It happens from time to time with, like, smaller cults that have that kind of thing, but sometimes you have that in large quantities. You had, for example, in the 17th century, there's the idea of, because of the weird numbers, that the year 1666 might be the end of the world. And luckily, in England at least, you got a plague, and then you got a big fire, so the whole thing was reinforced a lot. You had it there, you had it around the year 1000 AD within Christian ideas. You have, once again, this coming up in the early 19th century, when you have a strong reawakening of spirituality, mostly in what you call the burnt over district, which is also New England, roughly, like New York mostly, as far as I know this geographically. So that's the idea of millenarianism. It's once again strongly connected to Christian beliefs, and believing that you are the chosen ones, and that promised new age will come really soon, and then you'll be saved or whatever. Which brings us to that Letheras idea. I hope the background noises are not too bad right now. Anyway, so what it does with Letheras, we have the idea of the closing of that seventh cycle, whatever you want to call it, and the ascension, rebirth of the Letherii king and so forth. So you have that idea of millenarianism in a way going on in Letheras at the beginning of Midnight Tides already, right? And once again, this is very strong in American exceptionalism from time to time due to that very pious Calvinist Puritan streak that you have in a lot of American spirituality over the times, right? Okay, so let's look at Letheras. You have, because the closing of that seventh circle, you have the idea of I'll just have a drink while they're running up the stairs there. Okay, let's go back. So yes, you have that idea of millenarianism, the idea of an age coming to an end and something blessed and wonderful new showing up. You have that at the beginning of Midnight Tides. We also have a lot of descriptions in about Letheras, about the gaining of money being very, very important, wealth being the one thing that rules everything, right? And we have a rather strong religion in a way, unlike other parts of the Malazan world, in the fact that the Errant being that major deity of the Letherii, being very directly connected to the gaining or losing of wealth. Now, obviously, the Errant is a more volatile god than the Christian god in a Calvinist interpretation, so this is not a one-to-one thing here, and that's not also not the point that I'm trying to make here, that I will come to making in a couple of minutes. No, what it is to see that divine favor is directly connected with wealth, or the gaining of wealth, and the gaining of wealth and status through wealth is seen as an idea, is seen as a sign of divine favor, which then, endows you with all kinds of other benefits, because that go above, and that's the important bit there, that go above just the mere mundane favors of having money, because that already is a lot, right? It also, and this is, no, let's go to that in a couple of minutes. So we have that idea of divine divine favor being directly connected to monetary success, which is what I just tried to outline is the problem, or like the issue within the Calvinist interpretation or Calvinist influence on capitalism. And yeah, we have that as an overarching kind of faith or religion within Letheras, because while they acknowledge the existence of other gods, obviously, because once again the idea of gods being rather active within the Malazan world makes religion more complex or more complicated, I guess. But the overall god of the Letherii is the Errant, with his direct influence on fortune and misfortune. And that, I think, can be read as a parallel to that thing I just outlined as a Calvinist capitalist combination. It also means that the success of the Letherii Empire is directly a sign of favor by the Errant, which is where that exceptionalism comes in, right? Which that's the point where the Letherii exceptionalism comes in. The idea of the Letherii treading down all other cultures on that continent because they got the Errant on their side. That's like rooted in there, and so forth. That's the other dangerous bit there. This is a reinforcing doctrine, right? They've been successful. They've like taken down the like brutally conquered and incorporated and subjugated the Tarthanal and the Nerek and all these other tribes. And every time that happens, they feel like the Errant's on their side. They're predestined to success. Providence is on their side, and you see that. And that's the terrible bit there, right? That's where we come to the parallels to the Americas again. When you look at old speeches and writings of American politicians, they see their conquest of the entire continent as bolstered by a divine providence. It's like their divine mission and God's will for them to subjugate and eradicate and terrorize all the native tribes. That's God's will there. And in a sense, that's once again the same thing happening there with the Letherii, because it is very tempting to think that way, right? It's very insidiously tempting to think that you might have like divine benevolence on your side if you have success. So we have that there, and now I'm going to try to actually, after putting out this idea why there's a parallelism, I'm going to come to the point where I will try to draw out some kind of moral there. And the moral there is the problem, the danger, the problem that we're facing there, and that the idea of the fate, also the fate of the Letherii Empire, apart from a lot of other things that you can find in there, the fate that the Letherii Empire has within Midnight Tides. And this is a spoiler, basically, sort of a spoiler. I mean, up to this point, it's basically okay. It's let's stay within Midnight Tides, so this is not a problem. The point there is, quick aside, Greek tragedy, hubris is what leads to fall, and the fall of the Letherii Empire is basically hubris. And that might be worth looking at in a different video though. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about is the problem with capitalism, or the gaining of wealth being married closely to divine favor, or seen as divine favor. The problem there is that it makes the gaining of wealth a moral thing, and that's a problem. And that's basically what we need to talk about. And it's a problem in real world capitalism, which is once again that point where reading Malazan can lead you to things that you recognize about your behavior in the real world. Okay, let's look at it. Gaining wealth is fine in itself. It gives you a lot of benefits. It makes life so much easier if you have money. All of these things, that's fine. But it is not good on a moral level. You're not a morally good human being if you make a lot of money. You might be, but that's independent of you making money, right? Like you can be rich and powerful and a good human being, and you can be rich and powerful and an asshole. That's totally, both of those are options there. Now, if you see economic success as a sign of divine favor, and divine favor, at least in a lot of religions, it's not so strict within not so strong within the Malazan context, because morals are often kind of left out of there because religions are not that clearly formulated. But the point there is, if monetary success is a sign of divine favor, and divine favor is also linked to being a good person, because it's linked to living a godly life and all of that, right? It's divine favor. God is good. That's the point there. Then the monetary success you have is intrinsically morally good because God approves of this, right? And God is good, so you must be good if you make a lot of money. And God is, then also your decisions must be good, like your power decisions. That's the point where this destiny thing becomes so highly problematic. It's like, yeah, you're not just conquering the entire continent and killing, subjugating and so forth the natives because you have more advanced weapons, military knowledge, and bring them alcoholism and smallpox. No, you do it. You conquer that continent because God wants that, and because God is good. You're good by doing that. You're morally justified to do that, and that's the dangerous bit there, right there, both for personal success within capitalism and for military power success as a nation, in a way. At the point where you marry it through that insidious human drive or wish for divine approval, because you want to know what happens with you after death, through that, the idea of providence and predestination has found its way into our human, into politics and capitalism. And we see the same within the Letherii. They don't feel bad, apart from like the few that we're talking about, like, Hull or Tehol and a few others. But most Letherii think that they're predestined to do these things, to conquer the Edor, to conquer the entire continent, because they got the Errant on their side, because they got the Errant as their favorite god on their side. It's also good and right for them to do that. And that's the kind of thing that I wanted to point out today, is that the idea of Letherii arrogance that we see there is not just arrogance. It's obviously arrogance, it's there, sure, but it's also a sign for like taking their like religious faith or beliefs into their politics and into their economics, and thus morally justifying objectively abhorrent behavior on a political and economic level. And we see that when we read the book. We see how terrible, there's all this poverty, there's all the destruction of all these cultures and everything. We see that this is objectively terrible, it's abhorrent. But from the average boots on the ground Letherii person trapped within that religion, pseudo-religious system of politics and everything, they're morally right to do that. And that's where I see that danger. And now you can take that out and look at how that, pertains to your behavior in everyday life. And I think that's the point where we'll end it today. I hope this actually worked and wasn't too much background noise. And I'll talk to you tomorrow about something entirely different. Until then, have a great Saturday afternoon. Cheers.